Tell people welcome to Red Morning. Hey, it's Carl. How are you doing? You crack a beer, say some joke, make fun of my shirt, and then we're on. Hey, Yuri, thanks for the kind words. All right, that's my intro, Carl. I got nothing else here. What were we just talking about? You getting drunk on the beach, or?
Yeah, it was just my backup plan. If I decide that bitches are too many bitches and work is too much work, I'm just going to go to a beach somewhere and sit there and trash talk tradcons on the beach.
I love when you talk about too much work, because I swear to God, you're like, this is your one bipolar thing where you're like, oh man, life is stressful. I just want to stop and retire early. I can afford it and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay. And then I go make a sandwich or something. And then I come back and you're like, hey, I just signed 8 new contracts and I've got like 6 million in like receivable or deliverables or some fucking income nonsense. And I don't want to sleep for the next 3 weeks. And I'm like, yeah, there's Carl.
Well, you have to think about it this way. It's similar to having like one steady chick.
Mm-hmm.
You still kind of want to fuck other chicks on the side. And the reason I think of it like that is just that I have to have something to do with my time if I'm not working. And I'm also have a fucking hard time turning down money.
Your one kryptonite, cash. Oh no, I believe you.
Well, you know, I think didn't I tell you the story? Like, I'm not going to go into details, but it was like I was like 1 year away from like never working for anyone else, and it's like, hey, we'll give you equity in a new contract. It was like, fuck.
That was the one I was kind of referring, but I can't remember if we had that conversation online or off. And it made it I laugh because it reminds me of basic training. Like for me, when I got to basic, they fucked up the dates. So we actually got there like 3 days early and they didn't know what to do with us. So we just had to sit there in the barracks. We weren't allowed to leave. We just go do the meals, come back in, and you have to kill your time. And nobody brought like there was no Game Boy Advance or anything like that. Everybody just had like one person had a set of playing cards. And we were so bored by the end of it that when they started the basic training thing of like, you can't sleep, clean this shit, nothing's good enough. They're yelling at us. Everybody was just so starved for anything to do that we were like, unpunishable. And that's all I could think about. Dude, we crushed our basic training for that. I think they should make that a thing. Take away everything electronic from a guy for like 24 hours and then have him start getting his ass kicked. He'll thank you for the privilege.
Yeah, but there's something to that. I mean, it's like I've thought about it a lot. Like, would I ever like completely stop working? And I don't really see that in my future. I have some ideas about roughly the lifestyle I would like to have as related to work, but I can't even take like a 2-week vacation without starting side projects.
Oh my God. Yeah, travel after like day 4, I'm losing my mind. But that's a good thing too. Like speaking of the military, there was like this total thing that happened where they would joke about how a chief with like 35 years of service has a heart attack right outside the gate on his last day of work, because they just like, you need something to do with your time. Like I would totally try and run like the professional Tekken circuit if I retired. I get stomped by all these Korean 14-year-olds, but I'd still need like at least that something reason to wake up in the morning.
I did kind of like, I was watching some interview about it. Some guy was talking about working with Eminem, and they had an appointment like, yeah, I'll be at the studio at 9 tomorrow and we'll bang this out. And he gets there early because he's working with fucking Eminem, and Eminem shows up right on time. 9 o'clock, he's in the door. And the other dude is like, fuck, he's on time. And he's like, okay, we'll work until 1. We'll have an hour lunch, and then we'll come back in and work until 5. So they're sitting there working after lunch, and they get into a nice flow. And 5 o'clock, Eminem's like, yeah, I'm going to be out. I'll be here tomorrow. And then next day, same thing. Eminem comes in at 9. They work. He goes out to have his lunch, comes back in. They work until 5, and he's on his way to leave. And the other guy's like, why do you do this? And it's like, because I treat this like a regular fucking job. I don't make it more than it is. I don't make it less than it is. And that's the way to kind of keep the balance of it. It's a very healthy philosophy.
Oh, I like that. That's so, what was that saying? That eight hours work, 8 hours leisure, 8 hours sleep. That was like the old like labor movement slogan. I like how he took it to heart. Yeah. Shout out, by the way, to Life Math Money. Huge account. If you guys don't know, on Twitter, he's kind of a big deal. Red mornings, that's racist. Black mornings matter. Prepare for being canceled. On the point, though, I will come to this either now or later because I kind of like the Eminem stuff, but I'm going to shit talk the shit out of cancel culture. I don't know if you are. What's your like take on it? But
I don't know, I was thinking about it because I had to do some public transportation and stuff, so I actually had time to show prep or actually bothered to.
yeah.
And I think it's interesting that it kind of started with Justine.
Okay.
She was some kind of marketing chick who she was going to South Africa for work or on vacation or something.
Mm-hmm.
This was way back in like probably about 10 years ago, and she tweeted out the joke to her like 27 followers on Twitter. I'm going to South Africa. Hope I don't get AIDS. Haha, just joking. I'm not black.
Oh yeah, that chick. I remember that. And she landed and her life was over.
Yeah, because like it blew up and everyone was like, there's a trending hashtag on Twitter. Has Justine landed yet?
All right.
And I think that's where it started. And I'm kind of split on it because I kind of section cancel culture into like 3 rough boxes right now.
Okay.
Where you have what I legit consider an unhealthy cancel culture, which is the one where you go after people for either old sins or you go after them because they said one wrong word or weren't completely updated on the number of genders currently in circulation.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have people who are essentially voting with their wallets, which I think is completely fair. Like if you're dealing with a company and they do something you disagree with, it's your absolute right as a customer and as a consumer to stop patronizing them.
Yeah.
I think that's completely fair. And then you have the third one is this kind of, I want the freedom to run my mouth regardless of how retarded my opinion is. And the fact that someone stopping me from doing that is cancel culture.
Oh, the manosphere version of free speech.
Because
if I can't drop a hard R, what kind of world are we living in?
Yeah, that was kind of like a lot of the is it Gina Carano thing?
Oh, yeah.
That was kind of that last one because she works for Disney. They have a lot of ethics clauses and shit and behavior clauses in their contracts.
Yeah.
So when you violate them, it's completely understandable that you get fired. Like I have about 18 NDAs that I've signed in my life. If I break them, I'll get fired, and rightfully so.
Well, that's the thing. You kind of agree to it, right?
Fucking job. Yeah, well, you agree to it when you take the job.
See, I categorize it a little bit differently. I only have the 2 camps. There's the one where you get caught in the machine. I can use my example from the military, but Count Dankula is my go-to on this one. Like it wasn't cancel culture. It wasn't people screeching for him. It was literally once the law kind of got the gears in motion, he was just caught in the system and there's no single person responsible for canceling him. It's just the process works and it happened to screw him completely over. Couldn't see it coming. He was a shit poster doing like Nazi pug salutes, but like whatever. And then the other one is temporary discomfort cancel culture. Because back to your Carrera example or whatever the hell her name is. Do you notice though? Like she got canceled and then half an hour later, she's got this new deal with a new place and a new job. It's like, I'd almost say, I'm not saying it happened, but this is how it would happen. She's behind the scenes talking with whoever from the alt-right or whatever saying, yeah, we got this great opportunity for you. It pays this. Oh, I can't. I'm in my Disney contract right now. And they're like, throw out some 1940s references to the Austrian painter scene and we'll see what we can do. And then bam, everybody's talking about her and knows her name. Now she's got this great new product. And I think the people that get caught in cancel culture and actually screwed over are because they don't realize that it's like a marketing gimmick now, basically. It's like the wrestler who has the razor blade in his thing. So he slices his head so it looks like he's got a giant gaping wound, but he's not really hurt. Just hurts a little bit in the beginning because the salt from your sweat makes it sting.
Yeah, I kind of like that take there because branding yourself because of you got canceled, that's become a new cottage industry.
Oh, it's crazy.
At the same time, though, do people really want to know how sausage is made?
I don't think they do.
Because a lot of the time, what happens in the media, the journalists come in kind of, well, let's say 3 varieties, but 2 that are relevant here.
Mm-hmm.
The ones that are oblivious to being used, and the ones that are happy to be used.
What do they call those? Useful idiots and then meat shields or something like that? I can't think of a catchy way to describe it.
Essentially, to categorize, like the useful idiot is some retard who just believes whatever someone tells them.
Mm-hmm.
So someone tells them behind the scenes that, hey, this isn't from us and this isn't from me, but you should write so-and-so. And they're like, oh, yeah, that's a good idea. I have to produce 10 articles for BuzzFeed this morning. That might as well be one of them. And then you have the other kind who's like, who gets the same offer, like, you should do this and this. And it's like, yeah, but what's in it for me if I do this? Oh, well, we'll fix a gig for you as some kind of cushy PR person for so-and-so company for $200,000 a year.
Yeah. And we're not talking anything new either. Think about the lobbyist pipeline for elected officials. Pass some really crappy law. Your constituents get pissed off at you. They vote you out. And then you have a consulting job for some military industrial complex thing here because you made them $1 billion with some legislation you pushed. Like that revolving door thing is just taking that and applying it writ large. Am I using that one right? I'm trying to sound smarter on the cast. So I'm using Latin.
Now, I do think that's a very good kind of reasoning behind it, that the revolving door thing is always going to be an issue because it kind of creates a moral hazard.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Well, not only a moral hazard, it incentivizes people to just ignore the moral hazard and just do whatever. You know, I keep referencing the millennium dialogues, the strong do as they will and the weak suffer as they must, or slave and master morality. But that's essentially what it is. Somebody even brought up James Damore in here. And I would argue that that's proving the rule because he doesn't understand the subtext at all to this stuff. He knows that counterculture exists, but he didn't have some like right-wing conservative victim pipeline. So he just genuinely took all this stuff at a surface level. He's like, well, there's a reason that women aren't in tech and this is how we can fix it. And then they chewed him up and spit him out. He was literally the guy who just walks into the rooms like, hey guys, what's going on? Right in the middle of a gunfight, you know?
And he's kind of right, and he had a good argument, and he voiced it well. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't really matter when you're living in the age of marketing.
Yeah. And that's it.
James Damore would have been taken to heart maybe in like 1960. But you kind of see that once you start to read into what happened throughout history. Mm-hmm. You always kind of had the same phenomena. It was just different people that were kind of caught up in the machine, as happened with Count Dankula.
Yeah.
So you always have some people who just get caught up in it. But I think the moral hazard is worse because it creates an incentive to not do your current job properly because you can make more money somewhere else later. So your return on investment for your time is better if you do your job, let's say, unethically or incompetently than to actually do it well. The same thing with the lobbyists. They're in there trying to make every bill have as many loopholes as humanly possible in order for them to be able to please their clients. That's how you get the piecemeal legislation.
Oh, exactly. The thing that freaks me out about it is that I don't know how many people know and are playing along, like who gets the kayfabe and who's generally illiterate to it. And I would argue the smarter, more savvy political class tend to be the ones that believe it. Like, you remember the Gervais principle, Venkatesh Rao, how he talks about how organizations have, I guess for the audience then, if you guys don't know, he says every corporate organization or organizations in general have 3 tiers of people. They have sociopaths, they have the clueless, and they have losers. The sociopaths are the ones that essentially run things, and with amongst each other, it's all power talk and status position, driving the company forward against its best interests. The clueless are the ones that buy the over narratives and they don't understand the underlying power games involved. And they're generally spoken to by sociopaths with like baby talk. You know, oh yeah, of course. And They do their thing, and the losers aren't like losers in a pejorative sense. They just mean the economic losers. They're the ones that they don't know. They know the system, but they can't thrive in it. I argue it's like MGTOW for whatever organization you're talking about. And for those, sociopaths don't have to like coddle them at all because they know these guys are powerless to stop them. So they get direct speak. They're just telling them like, shut up. And I swear to God, the more I see this, the more I realize I think that model fits into council culture much more than this. You know, what are they saying now? It's progressives want drag queens to chop off your kids' nuts or something like that. It's like completely nonsensical.
Well, it also keeps the attention away from what's actually happening, because while the progressives and the conservatives have been arguing about the drag queens and transsexuals and homosexuals and prayer in schools and prayer in church and all this shit, the top 3% is essentially soaking up all the money.
Mm-hmm. And it's so blatant.
Like, I've hung around some of these people and they only think in terms of money. You'd be surprised how many of his principals a sheik from Dubai is willing to give up if it can make him a couple of $100 million.
Well, it makes sense. The girls they hire off of Instagram basically let their 13-year-old kids take a dump on the chick's chest for 50 grand. So it's not like he's not surrounded by like a normative culture of this stuff.
Oh, it's you kind of notice that whenever you move into those circles, that there's essentially you're above the law in a sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, didn't he just murder a dude? One of the sheiks murder a dude in a separate country, and the biggest response they got was some like finger wagging. Don't do that. Okay.
Please don't do that again.
Yeah.
So incompetently, there's video. Why didn't you take out the fucking security cameras?
Look, I had two choices, sir. I could have either put mines in the Strait of Hormuz so you don't get your oil, or I can murder this dude in cold blood in your hotel. You pick. It's like, all right, then, fair enough. Arnold, though, he's got a good question. Where is the money in cancel culture? I think there's tons of examples in this. Do you want to start, or do you want me to start?
Well, we just started on it with all this. It's a distraction so that people making money can actually do that while people are busy tweeting about whatever bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have all the journalists who are angling for cushy PR people gigs. You have the people who are trying to build their brand out of what I have to tell you is so dangerous. They tried to cancel me, but they failed if you follow me to my private community over here on Mindspace.
Yeah. Or Clubhouse or whatever the du jour one is. Dude, that makes me, I still laugh about that. The guys that tried to get into the cancel culture grift but couldn't during that Trump ban wave. And so they started deleting their accounts so they could like, look, I was gonna get deleted, but they couldn't fire me. I quit. So join me. I'm like, dude, what kind of stolen valor shit is this? Just do what everybody else does. Call a woman a cunt and drop a hard R. Get banned like a normal person. Jesus. Lazy bastards.
And I think what it came down to, those people are sad just because they couldn't get themselves to get banned easily. It's not that difficult to get banned if you really, really, really want to try.
Mm-hmm. But that's the problem. They don't understand the conversation that's being had either. I'd argue it's the same as like the average frustrated chump that can't talk to women, because I said the exact same things from the script that Mystery gave me, but it's not working. But it's like, yeah, it's not what you say, it's how you say it and what's being left unsaid. That's how come what's his name? The guy who did the deadlifting record as a woman. He's on Twitter now. Zuby, yeah. He understood the game and he was poking fun at it. And then he got it. He kind of like, he showed you how toothless cancel culture is, because technically he should have been canceled for that, but everybody kind of still went with the motions. Oh, I get it. He was trans for 5 minutes. He lied. That's great. He's against the people I don't like. Let's follow him. And then the only difference was he didn't need the marketing of being canceled.
No, I think ultimately there are a ton of layers to the entire, let's say, concept of cancel culture.
Mm-hmm.
But it speaks into like the wider social narrative too. But specifically, cancel culture is just a form of ostracism.
Yeah,
it's essentially a bunch of us disagree with what you said, so we're going to try and fuck things up for you. So your speech has consequences.
It's what happens when you put chicks in charge of dueling culture.
Because I will say, I do think Idi Amin had the best quote on free speech ever.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we have freedom of speech here, but I can't speak for freedom after speech.
I always love those arguments. Yeah, you
And
totally
it's
have freedom
kinda,
of speech, except for all these exceptions that make it really irrelevant.
and I do think that I think social media is kind of the bigger problem in here because it used to be that in order to cancel someone, you would need to have a lot of leverage.
Mm-hmm.
You would need to own like a William Randolph Hearst style newspapers, or you need to have ins with a lot of politicians that could kind of fuck with legislation. Now it's enough that you have like 500,000 Twitter followers or whatever.
Yeah, like the chick
and,
that canceled. It's trying to cancel. Who's that guy? Cuomo, whatever you pronounce his name as.
yeah.
That chick is funny. I'm like, dude. I made a joke today. I've run the most powerful city in the world for like 30 years. What did you do? Well, I'm a middling four with tired eyes who can complain with effortless ease. Game woman. But he'll be fine.
I don't think the truth on either side of the narratives is the truth, though. Because I think you have a mix of like the clueless sociopaths and losers.
Mm-hmm.
And the losers are kind of seeing what's going on.
But all they can do is complain. That's the only power they seem to have.
Yeah, or they don't really give a shit. Because I kind of see the losers as there being like two main sub categories of them. You have the people like Jim from The Office. He's clued in, but I don't think he gives enough of a shit to actually do anything.
Right.
Like you could say, let's take the stoner who works tech support. He knows exactly what's going on, but as long as he makes enough money for weed and a big TV and munchies, he's cool. And he has like no responsibilities, nothing to worry about. He just wants to kind of chill through life. And then you have the person with greater ambitions that is legitimately wants to move up into being either clueless or a psychopath,
but just doesn't know
but
how.
Is unable to for a variety of reasons. So if you look at those two, you see those kind of in cancel culture too, because I'll be honest, I don't give a shit. So I'm a loser in this analogy because I just don't think any of these socialist issues or social phenomena is worth that much of my time.
No, I 100% agree. I'm same with you, the loser on that side of things. I'm not getting paid out of cancel culture, and like you, I'm sure it could be lucrative, but I don't really feel like putting up with that nonsense to get there. Well, whether we're skilled or not at it, we'd probably be good at it if we applied to ourselves. But like you said, why? We don't have to, and I think that's the part that most people miss on this stuff.
And I think the clueless in this case are the people who kind of just jump in on the bandwagon,
right?
And they just kind of go along with the flow. It's the kind of like the status quo bias in society.
Oh, are you talking about like the retweeters?
Yeah, essentially. Or even like the lurkers on Reddit. They read everything, but they don't participate or contribute.
Yeah, those ones. Well, I'd say they do contribute. They're kind of the reason that it gets the traction it gets. Although it is funny, you are right about the retweeters. I love it. Every time, like I'll wake up and I'll check Twitter and I'll see some fantastical headline or something. And then I just realize, scroll through my timeline, I see 8 people who have retweeted with their own hot takes that cleverly define their brand, me included. And then it just spreads from there. And I just realized some poor bastard like gets his wife cheating on him with like the maid or some shit like that, or the kid gets his balls chopped off and changes his mind, and then everybody else is just scavenging the corpse. And it's just, I mean, that's where we're at right now. But it is so jaded.
Okay, so AI here had a super chat that kind of, well, you can be canceled as a business too. You have a couple of examples of businesses that got absolutely trashed on Yelp and any social media for various grievances.
The Better Business Bureau. They used to be like an extortion racket for that kind of shit.
So that can happen as well. So, but I don't think most people have a concern about being canceled in the sense that unless you have to do something fairly hardcore to be noticed on that level.
Mm-hmm.
because they don't tend to go after there was the guy who was what was he, a power company guy or something, who got canceled for doing like a white supremacist hand signal while he was sitting in his truck. He was probably just flicking a booger or something.
Oh, I didn't even know about this one.
Yeah,
Case in point.
you have some of those marginal cases. But for the most part, the people who complain about being canceled are people who complain about being canceled on 7 national TV channels.
Mm.
And in my view, you can't complain that you've been canceled if you get a new lucrative deal and you get press time and like on Fox News and in the papers.
Well, that's the same as saying Hulk Hogan can't complain because in WrestleMania 6, the Ultimate Warrior beat him for the title. It's like you can. That's kind of the kayfabe of it. You have to theatrically show that you were wounded, or what's the wrestling term when you have to sell the hit?
Oh yeah, it's called selling, literally.
Yeah. If you guys don't know, it actually turns out the best wrestlers aren't the ones who can do the fanciest moves. The best wrestlers are the ones that can show that the move hurt them. They're the ones that can like fly and hit the mat and roll around and get punched really well. That's how you sell a match. And I think all this complaining about cancel culture is essentially that. Can I just take a moment too, Carl, to say that why is it that every guy I talk to who was raised on like wrestling growing up is the most savvy on this shit?
I just think it comes down. I kind of think it comes down to the fact that you kind of grew up watching theater, but something that was aimed to be realistic theater,
right?
Because if when you start watching wrestling as a kid, it's not immediately obvious that it's not a legit sports competition.
Mm-hmm.
But once you grow up a bit and you realize that, yeah, no way that guy can get 17 chair shots to the head and still get up.
Yeah.
It's kind of like every fight scene in every action movie ever. Like, there's no way you can get up after, you've had the shit kicked out of you for 3 minutes.
There's no way you can stand there with an M60 and just mow down an entire army without any of them shooting back at you.
So I think once you understand that, you kind of start to see how much of society is actually a form of, let's call it emergent theater.
Ooh, I like that. Put that up on the thing.
Because there's not like there's an actual script to what's going on.
No, it's totally improvised.
Yeah, but every actor who's savvy kind of knows what the other actors are doing. So what that means is, let's say you're a politician and you want something passed. So you put a proposition on the table. Even if the other side agrees 100% with you,
right?
They need to either they can just say that, okay, yeah, you did a good job here. But that means you give credit to the other side, and they don't like giving like unadulterated credit to the other side. Or you can go in and say, yeah, this is a good bill. We agree with you, but we need to have this and this and this and this in here in order to make the bill better. And then you have the where was I going with this? And then you have
that threw me off too.
Straight opposition. That is just like, no, we disagree with this shit. We're not going to pass it. Then they shoot it down, and then 6 months later, they do their own bill. Mm-hmm. That's essentially a copy paste of the other bill, but they kind of had time to set up the cell of it. Right. You can kind of catch them sometimes because you notice it a lot more in countries that have more than 2 parties. Because usually, like, the parties will have like huge meetings with delegates where you discuss what's going to be our policy for the next 4 years, what's going to be our strategy, and you kind of agree on this framework.
Right. And
let's say Party A has their meeting in April, and Party B in May. Then Party A everything for Party A's meeting will be publicly known before Party B has their meeting. Which means they can just take whatever they did and they can jump ahead in something that they think, okay, this is going to be a winning case for us. And then suddenly Party A, who may want to take ownership, lost control of the narrative over that issue. And then there's no way to work fast and to do an extra conference and fix that in the span of, a short period of time, so they kind of lost the issue.
Right. I think they call that not having the political will or something like that, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think if you work in finance, you would be aware of this too. Or in, I think finance and consulting are the two ones you run into this a lot, because you have two sets of languages in those worlds. In the sense that in finance, you have the client-facing side, which is, yeah, we're stern, we're responsible, we know what we're doing, we like our clients, and our goal is to make as much money as possible for our clients. And then you have kind of the real talk when you're with a bunch of fucking brokers where they're like, yeah, our clients are fucking retarded. We're only working here to earn some money for cocaine. And I think this shit is going tits up in 3 weeks.
Oh, dude, those startups have the same thing where they, on the front end, the customer sees this as like an automated system, but on the back end, it's like, yeah, we couldn't afford the developers to do this, so we're manually processing orders and shit like that. It's like just duct tape and rubber bands on the back end. And nobody cares. They just want to have that one startup that they can cash out their stock, Microsoft style.
Yeah, and then you have Google, for instance, and the social media companies that have this image that, yeah, we're good companies, we're progressive, we're for social justice, and they're just hardcore capitalist machines on the back end.
Oh, yeah. My favorite of those is Apple. When they were getting all them suicides in that Chinese factory. So they're like, all right, what's the cost of saving these guys' lives? What's the cost of buying some netting? They went with the netting. To literally know what are you worth? I'm worth about as much as a couple tarps.
It's once you start seeing it too, you can't unsee it. It's kind of like the red pill in that regard. That once you kind of see how once you've been the guy that a chick cheats on her boyfriend or husband with,
right?
You're kind of at the point where you're like, okay, these bitches ain't loyal for shit.
Oh, dude. I even made that argument in my book, Heels Over Head for Rose. I was like, yeah, I've been cheated on a bunch. I didn't learn nearly as much as the girl that kept, while I was balls deep, telling me how great her fiance was. Like at the time, I didn't care. But then once you have that time to get the jizz out of your ears and think about that, I'm like, that's some fucked up thing to say. I think he's just great. Could you hit it a little to the left, please? I'm like, what the fuck? And I know it's not even, I know this isn't a fantastical story. I guarantee you have one in your repertoire somewhere, and half the audience has one too. It's like, this isn't uncommon shit.
Yeah, and once you've seen that, you kind of can't unsee it. And it's kind of the same thing when you've attended like one of these closed door situations where people can actually afford to be completely honest.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a couple of drinks involved, so they're not like have their guards down a bit, and people are completely honest about all the shit that goes on. Yeah, we made out great at the oil field in the Congo. I mean, we had some issues with the locals, but we just sent in a company of mercenaries, and they fixed that problem for us.
Jesus. A little more hardcore. Actually, I shouldn't even say Canada's mining industry. I guess we're pretty damn brutal across the world. Us in Australia, fighting over who gets to be the evil overlords. Ooh, here, Chesty's got a good one.
Yeah.
I take it she was Japanese then? There's a Pornhub joke for you guys, but I'm bummed. We're laughing at such human misery.
But the fact is, like, once you get down and you actually see what goes on, you can't unsee it. So whenever that kind of took away my pleasure from, I can't enjoy the news cycle anymore because I know all the shit that goes on behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Like whenever I see someone, all the left-wing papers are writing about transsexuals now. What the fuck did the government do now that they're trying to drown out in the media?
Oh yeah, the cover up. Dude, I love those.
Like Clinton in the 90s. Yeah, I just got a blowjob, but I'm just going to go and bomb a little bit in Bosnia just to take the attention away from the fact that I got some head.
Jeez, that's right up there with the netting. What are you worth? About a half a blowjob from a 4 out of 10 at best. Son of a bitch. Yeah, I don't know. Those, they get me. My girl kind of over the COVID time, she's been watching COVID and then seeing how ridiculous it is. She's kind of red pilled herself to the media too. The newest one I showed her was, I don't know if you guys know this, our Minister of National Defense. He's our like Secretary of Defense. He lied about his military career, but he was really sorry about it and wanted to get back to the job. Didn't kind of gave like non-apologies and he's all for it. And everybody's like, well, whatever. He lied a little bit. He's still worthy for the job until to like last week when he hired a new chief of defense staff, basically the top military official. Even though the ombudsman warned him, is like, hey, just so you know, this guy diddles subordinates. You probably don't want him in this position, especially since you just had like your governor general acting like a complete cunt. He's like, I don't want to see that shit. Don't show it to me. So now it's like, again, incompetent, but the news kind of plays it off as like some weird conspiracy. And then all of a sudden, minorities not getting COVID vaccines, and it all drums up. And it's predictable. It's funny. I like when the examples happen every 3 months so you can actually show them to people and get a little bit of media savviness. Because I think if you're not media savvy in 2020 or 20, what year is it? 2021? It's like you're just going to get run over.
Well, you just have to kind of keep in mind that most people, when they go through school, they kind of learn that everything you read, you need to take it as fact and you need to remember it for this test later. We spend like the first 7, 8, 9 years, 10 years of the kids' schooling telling them exactly that. Mm-hmm. You don't really get training in, like being critical of sources and so on until you start to hit like somewhere between like bachelor degree level and master's degree level. At that point, you start to have to be like, yeah, you have to go and read the actual thing. You can't just read the fucking abstract. But even then, there are a lot of examples of, people faking scientific articles.
Yeah, on purpose, even just to show how horrible it is.
Yeah, so it's not a good process, and you just can't believe most things. And I think the two issues that really kind of red pilled me to it was a combination of wrestling and weed.
Ooh, I like that. All right, let's hear it out.
Because like wrestling, you kind of learn that, okay, they're just playing theater. The Iron Sheik and Hacksaw are buddies, and they're doing crystal meth together up and down the highway. So that kind of red pill into it. Just because someone pretends that they're actually at odds doesn't mean that they're at odds. Like, we can play pretend a lot more, and we play pretend a lot more than people think. But we have a bias to think that people are being truthful and authentic. Like, our little buddy there, Hacksaw, who was like, I want to write authentically, and that lasted for about 10.5 minutes. And then was back. Yeah. And then the whole weed issue was just that, I'm not sure how it was in Canada in the 80s and 90s, but there was a huge, just say no, and all these kind of real hardcore, like almost reefer madness level anti-drug campaigns.
Yeah, it wasn't as bad, but we had a lot of influence from the States. So yeah, I know what you're talking about.
So, and I think the first time I smoked weed, I think it was 25 or 26.
I was 35.
And then it was like, okay, so I tried it once just because I was curious. Mm-hmm. And then nothing bad happened. So I tried it again about...
Wait, you weren't instantly on heroin a week later?
Yeah, like none of it was true. And then I tried it, 12, 13, 14,000 times more just to make sure that it wasn't just, I wasn't lucky the first time.
You're very thorough.
Well, you need
rigor.
Well, I kind of need to expand my sample over time. We're doing a longitudinal study here, Ryan. and once I kind of got to that point,
yeah,
they've been saying that this will instantly kill you in like one puff, will send you straight on heroin. And then, okay, so that was a lie of quite a magnitude.
Oh, I agree.
So that kind of made me, okay, if they'll lie about this and they'll keep, chasing stoners all the time, like what else are they lying about? And after that, I just never trusted the government ever again.
Yeah. And I don't blame you.
And the media were kind of like the partial useful idiots, partial opportunists on this issue. Because I've seen some studies on like how the media handles drug stories. Mm-hmm. And, a dude a school bus driver gets drunk and crashes, the school bus with 37 kids in it.
Right.
You'll read something like a school bus accident, and then buried way into the article, driver was intoxicated. And then if it's some dude, some guy goes driving 2 days after he smoked weed, and he has a car accident, he drives into a post or something, then it's driver,
weed-crazed maniac.
Weed-crazed maniac driver crashes into cow.
Yeah. Military, though, we kind of got trained for that. Same thing. If somebody fucks up, oh, he fucked up. If a military guy fucks up, the military fucked up. And so that was one thing they did warn us about really early. And why I never wore my uniform off base, ever.
Yeah, it's not good if you're sloppy drunk in the middle of Montreal or something, pissing up against a wall in your full dress uniform.
First off, that was Ensenada. Secondly, it wasn't the full dress. It wasn't the N1s. It was your 3Bs. CF guys will know what I'm talking about. You guys got me. To be fair, though, I never did that because I was brown enough where I didn't trust the Mexican authorities wouldn't just beat the shit out of me. Like the white guys, they just get robbed. They pay the fine. I'm like, I don't get that luxury, man. I got to be straight and narrow here.
Yeah, and actually, one of the things that I kind of started noticing with that was just I started digging into the media sources I regularly use. Mm-hmm. Because you can't kind of be completely off media because you have to get news from somewhere.
Right.
So I started, okay, these are the 4 I read regularly that I get most of my information from.
Mm-hmm.
Let's dig into who owns them. Who are their main journalists? Does their editor or editors have a history? And then you start to notice, okay, this editor here, he's married to an oil industry lobbyist. So maybe take whatever's oil adjacent with a grain of salt.
Makes sense.
Or, this reporter here, he's married to some church lady. So expect him to always have the churchitarian view on things. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad journalists overall.
No, it just means you understand the bias.
They will have biases in certain directions. Like if you read the Financial Times, you can usually assume that the fucker writing it is a greedy motherfucker. Mm-hmm. That's angling to get some kind of corporate investor relations gig at some point. So it's just a matter of being a bit more critical about who you listen to. And I think the funniest thing there, though, is a report I read a while back where they're kind of noticing that media doesn't work on Gen Z.
Which makes sense.
Because Gen Z is the most, Gen X was cynical, mm-hmm. but not cynical in the sense that they were critical of the media. They were just critical of the culture in general.
Right.
And especially their parents' culture. But with Gen Z, it's more that they've kind of grown up with constant social media messaging and newspaper messaging and so on, that they're just immune to it. It's you
know what it is like? It's like millennials and marketing. I can't remember where I got this from, but there was an advertising research paper talking about this, and the grunge generation millennials, the earlier millennials, are impossible to advertise to because they're so just distrusting of marketing in general. And that's where the whole anti-brand thing came up.
Yeah, and that's the millennials. But then you have the Gen Z. They're not just cynical of marketing.
Yeah, they're cynical of social media.
Classical marketing. They're cynical of social media. They're cynical of newspapers, of any kind of reporting. And I remember I laughed my balls off. I saw this interview with a guy who's been running these kind of anti-drug campaigns in schools and shit. Mm-hmm. And he's actively being heckled. And they're laughing during his presentations.
Good on him. Just say no, bro. By the way, here, I'm going to get this one out of here. I can change your mind in a heartbeat. Carl didn't get caught, so he can't be Edward Snowden.
I also didn't leak anything.
Exactly.
You know how much money I'd lose if I started leaking shit?
Oh, probably. Yeah, I was gonna like. I don't feel like joking about national security issues. I don't want some CSIS agent being like, "Oh, I think we got him, boys. Get
Yeah,
him and the
that's
weird
kind of
invisible man."
well, like I think the meme that best kind of illustrates that Gen Z cynicism
Mm-hmm.
is the FBI agent meme.
Oh, the one where they're looking and the guy like, "Good night, FBI," and the goes, "Good night."
Yeah, or like some guy looks up something really cringeworthy online, and it's like how I'm looking, how Satan's looking, how my FBI agent's looking.
Oh yeah, and they're all stunned.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be an kind of an interesting turn of events once they start to realize that the constant messaging has actually made people immune to messaging. Because you know the what's this called? It's exposure therapy.
Yeah, give a guy a bunch
And
of like a bunch of exposure to something, he eventually becomes less receptive to it. They use that
yeah,
for
it's
like
like
medications.
I remember they. Do you know who Andy McNabb is?
Hockey player?
No, it's the synonym for. It's the pseudonym of a guy who's a former British SAS Special Forces.
Oh, okay.
And they tested him for like stress tolerance. In he's in the book. I think it's Wisdom
Oh,
of Psychopaths.
that's where the name was from then. Yeah, so it's Dutton
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, yeah. And they kind of tested him, and he responds exactly like a psychopath because the military has essentially driven anything like fear, hesitation, and a normal reaction pattern under stress straight out of him. And I think it's kind of the same with like Gen Z because they're the first generation that have had smartphones and tablets since they were born.
Yeah, I agree. It's
Because
gonna
like
you develop a different skill set for sure when you have that stuff.
because like even like some of the younger members of my family who are like mid to late millennials haven't had like phones and everything from they were born. They've had them since they were like 4 or 5 usually, but not since birth. So I think it's just a matter of they've been exposed to it so much that they become immune to it, and we still haven't found a way to effectively communicate with them.
Well, I mean, we do. I just don't think effectively communicate with the intent of selling, I think, is the issue. You can still have a conversation with somebody. Granted, I'm noticing this KSI guy on YouTube. He just put out this great video of like one guy picks 10 girls out of 20 kind of thing. Everybody is awkward with social conversation, but you can tell like they're earnest about it. Like they want to have a face-to-face convo. They just don't know that eye contact is good and you can let silence sit for a bit.
Yeah, so essentially what you're saying is the entire generation have become MGTOWs.
Pretty much. But it's not that there's no way to talk to them. They just need practice. You know? Millennials need practice too, because we're so busy being retarded on it.
Well, I've been noticing the funny thing with doing a lot of like online meetings because of the COVID lockdowns.
Mm-hmm.
You're kind of noticing the boomers, the millennials, and the Gen Z. Because the boomers are usually the ones who are completely comfortable during in-face meetings. They love those. And then you have the millennials who are okay at them, a little depending on early late. And then you have Gen Z who they won't say a word during the meeting, but they'll send you a 3-page email afterwards.
Makes me laugh.
And
I can see that. I can see that.
Just has to do with, are you more comfortable communicating online or in person? And I think Gen Z, for a lot of them, it's natural to communicate. It's so natural to them to communicate electronically. So they just have a lot more training doing that. Like it took me fucking 6 months to learn how to use emojis.
I love playing it up. My joke on that is like, I'm old, I don't get emojis, and so I send my World Trade Center bombing emojis. It's like the ones of the planes going up, over, down, 2 buildings, 2 explosions. I'm like, am I doing this right? Too soon.
So I think
but I think it's a good thing though for millennials is that you're right. Zoomers, they're kind of slow on the uptake. I don't mean they're stupid. I just mean if you're having a conversation, they're not able to think on their feet. They need that deliberation time, which it's weird. You figure the internet would make people think faster on their feet, but it actually had the opposite effect, I find.
Yeah, because most of the messaging is text messages. So you have time to sit there and look and think about a response. Because even if you're just like messaging in text, the time it took to write that text is going to be longer than it would say if you were just responded off the cuff. And I think that might be why some of the Gen Z guys are getting back into like the early stages of game.
Yeah, because it's literally a skill set they have to learn.
Yeah, they need those training wheels. And I've seen a couple of guys I've talked to who they have great text game, but they flounder once they actually meet the girl. So it's going to be interesting to see how that goes forward, because even if you move forward with this COVID lockdowns, if let's say this becomes more of a permanent issue rather than a short-term issue,
right?
It's going to exacerbate the trend towards that type of conversation.
Oh, for sure. I think that damage is already done. But I will say this, divorced millennials are going to be cleaning house just on like the be able to approach and talk to somebody's skill set, because it hits all the right markers. You're not, no social circle nonsense, no, oh, he's on my Discord channel. If they find out I'm a hoe, I'm going to lose my superstar status or some shit like that. It's just met a guy at the corner, had sex with him, never talked to him again. It never happened. It doesn't exist.
Yeah, I'm especially loving the fact that there's actually more drug dealing now on social media than in the real world. I actually had a buddy of mine complain that he tried to go down to the normal spot. And if you live in a reasonably sized city, you know exactly what a spot I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And he complained like he couldn't get anything there because like there were no dealers left down there, because they were all just they're just doing like a delivery service of shit where you snap them and then they come and deliver at your house.
Ah, dude, that threw me off. When I left the military, I'm like, you know what? My first week out, I'm going to try pot. Screw it. And I did that. I didn't know. I'm like, I don't know how to source it. So I just went up to my patio. At the time I was in Montreal. There was a guy there smoking weed. I'm like, hey, man, who's your guy? Because I don't know anybody in Montreal. And he hooked me up. She just sent him a text. I sent a text. 15 minutes later, he's in his car outside my place. I sit in the back. He asked me how much. I guess most people who buy weed are cheap. So when I gave him like a 50, he was like, oh, pulls out the big bag. There you go. And I was just amazed at how efficient and streamlined the process is. And he had no nervousness. There was no looking over his shoulder. He didn't ask if I was a cop or anything. And I still had the military haircut. So it's a reasonable question. But yeah, it's Uber, I think, had some guy, whoever started the Uber app, Uber Eats or whatever, he used to be a weed dealer. And then he just applied it to food. I guarantee.
Well, I do actually think that was kind of a brilliant thing with Snapchat too, because Snapchat is perfect for drug dealers. It's perfect for two things: drug dealing and nudes.
Yeah, bless them hoes. It's like OnlyFans. It's perfect for soft prostitution.
But I do think it's going to move towards that. I think that way we communicate is also why cancel culture is so driven, because we're getting steadily more segmented in our interactions. Because
so you think it's a driving factor to the balkanization?
Yeah, I think it is, because you're on this person's Discord. Like it used to be like you had one internet, and everyone was on the same internet. Now some old people are on Facebook, younger people are using, Snap or WhatsApp or Instagram, and then you have all the different news sites people are on, and all the news sites usually have their own app, so you don't even need the regular internet. 4 different
Twitters, depending on which 3 you got banned from, you're on the 4th one.
And then, when we grew up, it was like you kind of grew up and if you had a decent social circle, you kind of interacted with a ton of people who had different opinions and were different people. So you kind of grew up, and hearing someone drop an F-bomb wasn't that big of a deal. If someone dropped a hard R, he may get, hey, dude, don't do that shit.
Yeah.
And that was it. Now it's more like you get the isolation combined with social media as a force multiplier when these groups meet. It's kind of like, I don't know how, but I have must have a sizable Nigerian following because I occasionally end up on Nigerian Twitter.
That's too funny.
Or like when you accidentally move out of kind of our zone of the internet, and then you find yourself in lefty liberal Twitter, or you find yourself in black Twitter, and it's just completely hilarious to see how different these groups are. And what happened with us in 2016 was just we happened to have a large overlap with conservative Twitter because we agreed on some fundamental things like men are men, women are women. They're different. That was basically our big point of agreement, and for that reason, it was like, oh, these are allies. No,
well, and hating neocons. I think everybody hated neocons. That was the other thing.
Yeah, fair enough. So, and everyone thought the Gamergate thing was bullshit. So you kind of got those groups overlapping and kind of merging into this like oddly defined, let's call it slop. And then you got a lot of conflict because once the thing we all agreed on, like SJWs are bullshit. The whole redefining genders is kind of bullshit. Or more
social
ideology.
Justice is more harm than good. Yeah, not everything is an identity.
Once those things kind of went over, we find ourselves like, why am I next to these fucking TradCon assholes?
I still love that guy with the 9 kids. Do you know him on Twitter? Puntum or whatever?
No, I don't think so.
It's speaking of the cancel culture kayfabe thing. I can tell he's on brand because his answer for everything is to make reference to his 9 kids. It reminds me of Total Recall, the cab driver, Benny. Man, I got 5 kids to feed. It's like, but it's funny because I remember Tate shit on him a while back at Colty Bra, and he just keeps throwing. It's like, dude, I got 9 kids. What do you got? You don't even have 2. And then he was saying that to me, and it's funny because I could tell it was on brand, the kayfabe, the exact kind of like appealing to your brand thing. And I asked him, I was like, why are you using your kids as like brand marketing gear? Like, don't you love them? And that kind of lost, like, it didn't really go anywhere after that. I think that's really the solution to this cancel culture is just to call out the theater for what it is and actually have honest conversations because people don't know where to go with that. I really think.
Yeah, Ben Shapiro did decently with that for a while before he went off the deep end.
Well, then he got into the narrative because money was good.
So once you actually see it for the theater that it is, and just be like, okay, I see what you're doing. Get your point across. I'm not going to respond. I think the apologies are, like, Bill Maher had a great piece on that on, I think it was last week's Real Time.
Right.
Where it's like, Justin Timberlake writes a heartfelt apology to Britney Spears for not being a perfect boyfriend when he was fucking 17.
Classic. I remember that.
And it's just the enemy of the good is perfection.
All right, how you find it here?
What?
No, keep going.
Yeah, the point is that if you're going, there's no such thing as a perfect person. And let's say you gave the police a carte blanche to just search every fucking house and every person and every cell phone. Then you'd find out that most of us are shady fuckers. And we have something like I saw someone put out a meme like, do you think you have a good relationship? Trade phones with your partner for a week and let's see if you're still together.
I think I can do that one because we did do that. When I broke my phone, I had to borrow hers for a week. But you're right, though. A lot of guys probably wouldn't.
Like, how many guys are out there who have girlfriends, but they're still on OnlyFans, still sliding into the DMs? The girl thinks they're in a long-term monogamous relationship, and the guy, and how many girls have like a rogues gallery of fucking orbiters who are just in her DMs on a constant fucking basis?
It's not just that, though. The thing that we were finding, because there was like this big beef for a while there in the Married Red Pill over, do you track your girl with GPS if you think she's cheating, or do you just like don't give a fuck and do your own thing anyway? What the guys were finding is when they would snoop on their girl's phone, it wasn't that she had orbiters or a guy was dicking her down. It's that they saw how she talked about him when he wasn't in the room. And it's like, she must hate me. Like, look at this shit. Telling your mom this is a lazy bag of shit. Telling the girlfriends, let me just get him doing dishes. Fuck that guy. And I think for a lot of guys, that ended up hurting even more. They would have rather caught the pool boy fucking them down because the rest was just attacking him as a person.
I can kind of see that.
Made me laugh.
I think it's to some degree complaining about the person of the other sex or whatever that you're dating or with. It's just, that's kind of par for the, you kind of expect that to happen.
Expect it, but I wouldn't say put up with it. For me, maybe that's a boundary thing for me, but my hard and fast rule is like unified front. All our infighting will be in the background. Don't trash talk my girl in front. She doesn't trash talk me. But to be fair, all of our couples would do that with each other and deprecate their spouse. So we had to like make a decision consciously to do that.
I just think it's a kind of a middle ground there where, yeah, don't deprecate, but it's okay to like joke with idiosyncrasies or things like that.
Oh, yeah. That's totally different. That's like I don't loving prodding.
And to me, it's also a bit with the whole thing that if a girl complains a bit about you to her mother, that's fair enough. That's just blowing off steam. I kind of expect that to happen.
Yeah.
Same way I expect all her girlfriends to know how big my dick is.
Yeah. What kind of man are you? What kind of trad are you if you're not posting your wife tits online to show how great she is?
I do think that was a kind of because I've always been kind of in the back being like, they're not looking to have a genuine conversation or to test the validity of your advice by asking you for the receipts. They're looking for an attack vector.
Yeah. It's painfully obvious. Gay Lube Oil was actually good for that. He had like back when he was like shitting on and scaring away every other content creator so he could be the biggest guy in the subreddit, which but yeah, that was his thing. Like he was bitching at 40-year-old men, guys twice his age, like, dude, show your physique or we don't want to hear what you have to say. And he was basically trying to bully people into sending shirtless selfies online. And I'm like, if you send him a shirtless selfie, you deserve what he's going to do with it.
Yeah, I would also say that being that obsessed, that I would say there's also something slightly homoerotic about pressuring everyone on the subreddit to send you a shirtless selfie.
Slightly? Just slightly? Yeah, whichever. The whole thing was weird.
In the same way Top Gun was slightly.
Are you saying the volleyball was a metaphor for anal sex? Did you know Roosh said had an article out that anal sex with men makes you gay?
Yeah, I think it was a TikTok I saw this week about that. Like some guy put out like, do you know that you can have sex with other men and not be gay?
What's the punchline to that one, or was that the punchline?
No, it was just a bunch of guys doing response videos, and the one guy was my favorite. He was like, "Hey, dude, if you suck a bag of dicks, you're gay." But then you get it. The funniest thing though is the prison guys, because I kind of love how guys who fucked other men in prison develop like their own kind of logic for why they're not gay. Or how that's not gay.
Right.
It was, I think it was some movie. It was like, hey, I'm not gay. He sucked my dick. I think it was my personal favorite on that topic. And it's kind of mirrors the same thing with women do. Because they will reason away any kind of shadiness like that. Be like, yeah, I didn't cheat on you. We were in different time zones. I didn't cheat on you because it was just oral. I didn't cheat on you because... my dad died, I was sad, and you weren't around. So it's always like a blame shifting or shifting it away from things they don't want to admit. It's kind of the same thing with the kayfabe theater that's going on in politics and in everything else. Because what happens is essentially that if you watch a debate, watch every time you have a topic shift. And it's really, if you don't know what I mean by that, look on Twitter. And because Ryan touched on it earlier, the guy who always manages to get this stuff back to his 9 kids, or the guy who you could tweet something, I call it essentially the Jesus fallacy, because it's something my evangelical relatives do every time there's a conversation. Like you could be discussing how to rebuild the engine on a 1964 Camaro, and my aunt would manage to slide Jesus and make Jesus relevant to that topic.
Oh, Jeebus, fix this transmission, please.
But what you'll notice in politics is essentially that, or any kind of debate, is that you'll have subtle topic shifts. Where, let's say you're discussing something. Let me see if I can just brainstorm a topic. Let's say you're discussing should the Canadian Armed Forces switch their main combat rifle? That's the topic. And you have one guy who's arguing, no, they shouldn't. This is tried and tested. We have hundreds of thousands of them already stored. And you have the other guy who subtly shifts the topic from combat rifles to armed forces spending, for instance. Or over to, no, we need to renew the Navy. And you can kind of tell where they are at in the debate and a real good debate leader will actually force them to get back on topic.
Look, when was the last time we saw one of those?
Yeah, it's very rare to see it. And Trump was a master of that too, because he was a master of not answering direct questions. Because whenever he was forced to kind of answer a direct question, it didn't end well.
Well, yeah, he would run out the clock with his like very repetitive nature of talking about it. A lot of huge, a lot of big. This guy's an asshole. I'm great.
Yeah.
It was like naked power. It was awesome.
But what I kind of liked with Trump on that is that he had a very like 8th grade level way of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at a skilled politician, they will be able to do this. They will be able to talk for 5 minutes and not say anything. I actually had a guy who quite cynically told me that the most important trait to have if you want to get into politics is the ability to say nothing with a lot of words.
Oh, so the same skills that you need as like a Manosphere red pill aware content creator.
Yeah, something like that.
Oh, fuck those guys.
But ideally don't have jargon. Because jargon is a barrier.
Well, I think that's sorry, go ahead.
No, if you're trying to make something like, I think one of the major turnoffs for people who get into the red pill is the sheer volume of gish gallop jargon use. Jesus, that was hard to get out. But essentially, you bury everything under a thick layer of your own jargon so that no one can actually tell if you're on point or not.
Oh, dude. And I know. And nobody can tell unless you know where the jargon comes from. Like, I've seen that where guys are like, I just want to be the alpha oak, bro. And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? But I get it. If you're new to this space, you hear the jargon, it's like, hey, it's my clubhouse handshake. I can use that. And
yeah,
you actually put me onto this a while back. So I'm making the effort now to use it less or as little as possible, or at least define it before I do. But you're right. Nobody else does.
Because I've kind of been looking at, because one of the things I've done a lot during my life is read various corporate papers, and especially before they go out. And a lot of the time you just mark out like half a page, like this doesn't fucking say anything.
The Chomsky bot is running amok.
And it just comes down to people are getting to the point now where jargon is becoming a social signal like we talked about last week. And cancel culture is kind of the ultimate sign of where was I going with this? It's the ultimate expression of social signaling. Because you're signaling to your own group that this person, he shouldn't be in the group. We need to get this person away because he's negative.
Right.
And it's kind of challenging like the limits of free speech, in my opinion, because the people who need free speech are the people who have non-majority opinions. If your opinion on an issue is the prevailing opinion or stance of the majority, you actually need to be defended.
Right.
What the hell was that background? Was that a Ninja Star?
No, it's the OBS. It's a virtual cam right now. Guys are saying it's pixelated in here, so I'm just doing a reset.
Fair enough. Anyway, so those social signals are there in order to see who belongs to the tribe and not. And people are constantly trying to frame the group.
Oh, that's because as
So
soon as you frame it, then you're obviously picking the traits that you know you can compete on.
Yeah, the traits that you actually like.
Yeah, like you're not red pill unless you have 9 kids. It's like, fuck, dude. Really? You're not red pilled unless you see the lizard people in the thing and storm the Capitol. It's like everybody always says that. You're not red pilled unless you drink red coffee, a coffee out of a red mug, you beta males.
And like the biggest issue that I see with that is you kind of do need to curtail some forms of speech.
Mm-hmm.
And we've kind of already accepted this because we have laws that say you're not allowed to threaten to kill someone. You're not allowed to
Libel, slander.
libel someone. You're not allowed to, incite a riot.
Right.
But it's more difficult when it gets into, let's say, anti-vaxxing.
Mm-hmm.
Because if that got enough adherence, then we'd lose herd immunity, and then you'd probably get a resurgence of a lot of now extinct diseases.
Well, that's how polio ended up coming back to California, wasn't it?
Yeah, there was
anti-vaxxers down there.
Yeah, so you have to kind of, should you ban or curtail that form of speech? Because you actually do that with products.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can't say that, oh, this essential oil cures cancer, because then you'll get the FDA on your ass. And the same thing with supplements. You can't say that if you take my protein powder, you'll gain 17 pounds of muscle before lunch. So we've already kind of curtailed that in terms of corporations, but we haven't done it for private citizens.
Because
it's very difficult to do
until social media.
Yeah, but it's also very, very difficult to do because who gets to be the decider? Because the odds here are that you're going to get some law that reflects the mainstream take.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a firm believer that the mainstream take is very rarely the right one.
Oh, agree. Do you want to go down the COVID rabbit hole with this or just keep it surface level?
Well, COVID is good, but I think I'm not sure if I tweeted, if I thought about tweeting, but I kind of divide people into 3 groups.
Okay.
You have like 20% who are, let's call them early adopters of new ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have about 60% in the middle, give or take, that are go with the flow people.
Right.
And then you have about 20% that are reactionary.
Reactionary is in contrarian, or
they want to go back.
Okay.
They want to go back. So essentially, you have people who want to go forward, and they're arguing the current status quo is not good on this specific area or whatever.
Well, can we not say forward? It's not necessarily forward. Can we just say it's like change and not change is essentially what you mean by forward and back, right?
Yeah, change and not change.
Okay.
No, back means you want change. Both the people who want to go forward want change, and the people who want to go backward want change, and the people in the middle think it's okay the way it is now. So it's essentially a status quo bias in the middle group. There is an appeal to the new in the progressive group, and then there is traditionality in the last one.
You're basically talking social justice warriors, trads, and then the silent majority, essentially.
Yeah, and you don't have to go. It's not like this is on a social level, like it's all of it. You find this when you go down into anything in detail.
Mm-hmm.
So if you
I agree, it's how people organize.
And whenever you get into that, usually the people who turn out to be right are the first group that are advocating change. And the reason why I think this is that if you want change, there's a natural impulse to not only educate yourself on the issue, but there's also a bias towards reading and conducting new research on that issue.
Okay.
Because you're essentially because you're unhappy with the present situation and you want to change that to something different. So you want to solve a present problem with a different solution than the one being used now.
I'm going to push back on this one, but in a different way than you're expecting. Keep going. I'm curious.
Yeah, so the reasoning here is that you want to when you're searching for new solutions, taking in a lot of data will automatically bias you towards taking in more research, more information, more updated information. And then you have the reactionary side. They already have in their mind the perfect solution because it's what you used to do earlier.
Okay.
So they're not biased towards tracking down any new info because they already have the answer to the question they're asking. And then you have the people in the middle who aren't going to like educate themselves on the issue specifically for the reason that they're not really that into the issue and it's not important to them. So they'll just go with whatever is decided.
Path of least resistance.
Yeah. So I think it's kind of like the horseshoe theory again, that, you know, the people in the middle, they're pretty satisfied. The people who aren't in the middle are the ones who are dissatisfied.
All right. Well, here, I'll push back a bit on this one, but not in the way you think. So, for example, you talked about the change, the not change. I would argue each of those 20% groups, they're kind of split in half, or maybe a Pareto principle thing. The numbers don't matter. Of the progressive side, there's the ones that are social losers to the majority. And so the idea of, oh, there's this new thing, I could be the clubhouse of the early adopters, and as long as I get in early, I'll be accepted in that group. They're the ones that will take, we use progressivism as an example. They take progressivism and they're like, you know what? You need to let, what's the turf fight? Like everybody's like, yeah, transgender people should have rights. That's the progressive push. And everybody's like, fine, they're a human being. They deserve rights. The guy who's on that side is like the clubhouse personality. He'll be like, yeah, well, you gotta pay for kids to have it. And they just escalate it as far as possible so they can show they're part of the in group, but they're so awkward about it. And I'd argue the reactionary side is the same thing. The part of the reactionary side that's good is we'd rather have emergent strategy. We don't agree that we should be the drivers of our own change. We think it should happen on a local level, like your libertarian type idea. The change will happen organically on its own and adapt to new environmental changes. And then you get the reactionary group that's doing that same clubhouse mentality of I want to fit in, saying that no, we got to make weed legal because it's been illegal for like the last 100 years. So don't you dare, or our kids will die. And I think it's the problem is there used to be a good balance because there was no social media. So there was a gatekeeper. If you wanted to progress things, you had to be somewhat competent, rise to a hierarchy. Then you could push for progressive change. Like what's a good example? FDR doing his thing there, the Great New Deal, which we can argue about that, but you get the point. But now with social media, and this is the problem that you alluded to early on, social media gives the crazies just as loud a voice as the experts. And so the progressive side is now switched over to guys who just want to push that envelope as far as they can for clout. The reactionary side, same thing. They just want to push like a complete stop to all process. We need to become Luddites. And then the people in the middle are just confused. And then it's just which side can convince the side in the middle that, no, this is what normal people think. It's all like a giant manipulation scheme. And then the only competent voices have been drowned out on both sides of this thing and in the middle. So the crazies are driving the ship. And I don't know where this ends. I really don't.
I agree with you completely on that, but I don't think that's necessarily a pushback. It's a complementary argument.
Yeah, that's why I said not in the way you think. But that's all of our arguments. Every time we're like, I got this motherfucker, and then you say the same thing in a different way. But it doesn't sell clicks if I say Carl and I agree on everything for 2 hours. Tune in.
No, but I think you're right. I think you're right in the sense that you do have that clubhouse mentality on both sides. It's essentially part of the driving force on both the progressive and let's call it the regressive side are both going to be social losers who have trouble adapting to the now or unhappy with the now. And it might not be because of competition. It might be for other reasons, but it's also part could be, okay, you can build your own kind of social hierarchy where you're dominant because there's a blue ocean here where no one's doing anything. And the trouble now, like you said, with social media is that the voices that scream the loudest get the most attention.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also a tendency, in my opinion, among journalists to not do their job correctly.
Oh, where's the incentive to? It's the same because rotating door the politicians were doing.
Because I do remember back in the day because now it's sort of like we have to let both sides of the debate speak unopposed. Versus we have to let both sides of the debates state their issues, but we're not going to let them overtly lie or misrepresent or avoid asking critical questions.
That's too hard to do, though. Bullshit can travel around the world before the truth ties its shoes, you know?
Yeah, but I'm seeing some rare examples in an article or in interviews where you actually see the journalists doing the job they're supposed to.
Really?
So when someone's like, yeah, well, 14% think this, and it's like, okay, where's that number from? Okay, it's here. Oh, I didn't bring the number. I just remember the number. And once you actually do that type of feedback, then you can start to get honesty back in our social conversation. But right now, everyone is click driven. And the truth tends to not get a lot of clicks.
Well, yeah, you're talking about the push for yellow journalism. Hold on a sec. I'm making headers as we talk here.
What do you mean yellow?
Yellow journalism was a term that came up in the turn of the century, back when the railroads were being built in the States. The idea was newspapers weren't subscriptions. They were just some guy on the street corner selling it. One newspaper was one product, and you sell the one product. So you had to make the most fantastical tales like, oh, the evil Chinese are bringing opium to your Puritan families, and they were selling. It's exactly the same as what we have now during like the robber baron times. Has to be a completely absurd article to draw people's attention enough where they have to read it. And they lied because you would sell the paper today, but tomorrow that customer wasn't there. So then what happened is it switched over to more of a subscription model. This is the Wall Street Journal times. And that was where I think from 1930 to 1970, I think is the time period they put it in. Don't quote me on the numbers. And the idea there was you would get a subscription to The Economist. You would get a subscription to the New York Times. And then these guys essentially had to do their work, be professionals, because it was a subscription model. You weren't just buying this one newspaper, you were buying a continuous set of newspapers. And then because of the internet, I'm sure you remember that 2000s thing where newspapers never tried to adapt to the internet and they just kept to their old model and they got completely just bankrupted. Now their plan is to adopt by going back to the yellow journalism model. Like nobody gives a shit about the New York Times unless they have this one story that hits your emotional triggers. So now they're back to like the yellow opium sales are killing your children and shit like that. And then
I think we might be on the way back now, though.
I'm hoping so, but that's the thing. I don't know what environmental changes. What's that?
I'm seeing a lot more paywalling.
Yeah, but that's the problem is that nobody signs onto those paywalls. How many people pay for journalism?
I do, but I have 3 subscriptions, but that's a different story.
Yeah.
But I do think back to I think the whole reason that was kind of funny is that I think weed becoming legal and the conversation changing is just the fact that over time, so many people tried weed. And not like regular smokers necessarily, but like once like 40-50% of your population has tried it, it's not
you can't keep the lie
anymore. And the lie dies. And I think that's kind of why like you see the Gen Z thing too. Because I actually talked to a coworker of mine and he has kids that are in like 14, 15, 16, you know, that time in life when you like to experiment with everything.
Right.
And he was open and like, I can't talk to my kids about drugs. Because if I talk to my kids about drugs in the way I was trained to think about drugs, I can't fucking tell them that, well, you know, if you take MDMA, you could instantly die, when they have a kid in their class who's chewed MDMA every fucking weekend for 2 years.
Yeah. Well, and the parent has like a bunch of photos when he was at that rave in the 90s. It's like nobody
It's very hard to kind
of
keep that going. And if you try to keep that going, you just get laughed out of the building. And I think that's just why we've come to the point that people don't trust any media sources. So Gen Z wants to try everything for themselves.
Yeah. Which it's a good thing to have. With the rare exception, there's some things that are generally bad. Like, let it paint, man. Let it go. Trust me. No. It's the media keeping us down. I want to see this.
Oh yeah,
for
I kind of
myself.
agree with you on that, but I think we're getting into a generation that also has the most access to media in history. So back when I was a kid and we got those Dare programs and shit, we didn't have any alternative sources. But
Right.
how are you going to say that smoking pot will kill you and you'll become unsuccessful and you'll become a loser when you're following fucking Snoop Dogg on Instagram? Like, who do you
Yeah,
think influences kids more, Rihanna or some guy from the police with his pot belly hanging out?
100% agree. Influencers that way are leading the charge. It's at the point where Kim Kardashian now is seen as like a boomer.
Jesus. She's
Actually, it
like
kind of
the
reminds me of,
original social media icon.
I was going to say, yeah. There's this guy, a Canadian I follow on YouTube, JJ McCullough. And he actually had this argument with a Gen Z guy on his channel. And it was, I can't remember if it was flat earth or anti-vaxxing, something like that. Anyways, but it's the downside of what you're talking about is, yeah, nobody trusts anything. And they realize that everything is just made up narratives and kayfabe. But then the problem that he was noticing is that it starts putting silly stuff like flat earth on the same plane as like a legitimate critique of something that the media has been lying about, like the drug war. And so for a lot of the Gen Z types, they don't know how to differentiate between a fake narrative and bullshit.
No, but actually, I heard a politician say that not too long ago, that the biggest problem that they're now experiencing with a lot of the issues is that they're speaking from a level of negative trust. It's not that people are even neutral. They actively distrust a lot of information sources. And that becomes very important when you actually have something like a pandemic happen. Because if you don't trust the government and you don't trust any information sources, then why the fuck would you listen? And I have a lot of people around me, this apartment. I hear parties every 2-3 days a week, and we're in a fucking lockdown.
Oh, you lucky bastard.
Like, if I want to go to a party, I don't even have to leave the apartment building. I can just go 2 floors down to those students that are living there and a party every fucking weekend.
Oh, dude, if I have to hear about another giant Sikh wedding in Brampton with 200 people in it while the Peel region is locked down, I'm going to shit myself. But then that's the double problem too. Like, the distrust isn't wholly misplaced. Like, COVID's a great example. Yeah, it's dangerous, but it's not the Black Plague. It's not the flu, but it's not the Black Plague. And then you get these two camps, the one that starts from negative distrust, calling COVID a hoax, and the guys that come from complete trust saying, if you don't put on a mask, you're going to kill the entire population and that we need to close everything in the economy. And there's no secondary considerations. And then everybody else is kind of caught. And I hate saying nuance because everybody always uses nuance the way they use authenticity, like some branded term to mean you're above it all. But like, yeah, COVID is bad, but it's not this bad. But there's real conversations and real solutions to be had in that, not even middle ground, but like skeptical ground. And they're totally drowned out by the Facebook moms and the scaredy cat journalistic types that are like, yeah, wear 3 masks. Otherwise, what's the point? Ooh.
Yeah, you want to do a super chat right now?
Yeah, unless you want to keep going on this rabbit hole.
Yeah, it's interesting, but we've been going on it for 15 minutes. I think they know where we stand on it.
Yeah, fair enough.
Well, I would say the hiring is a virtue signal in itself. It's a form of mix of appeasement and faux authenticity. Like, one of the funniest things in the world to me is that corporations during Pride months, all of them have the rainbow up. And then the other 11 months of the year, it's like, give me the money and shut up, faggot.
Oh, dude, that was hilarious. My mom came to visit me in Toronto during last year's Pride. She's like, I want to go see the trannies. And I'm like, I don't think you're supposed to say that anymore. She's like, whatever. She's taking like photos with dudes with dicks and their thing. She's like, this is awesome. I sent it to my girls on Facebook. But my girl's company had like a float and they're doing the thing. Just like you said, there was flags up everywhere. And then it was like the next month was Canada Day. And I walked outside. There was like 4 people walking down the street to a Starbucks. I'm like, huh. I don't know why, but that kind of jaded me to the whole thing. But then again, the CN Tower, they light up their tower and they did the rainbow during Canada Day. I'm like, You couldn't give us one goddamn day of like red and white, like whatever.
I do think one of the challenges that they have to deal with though in corporate is that they have to hire SJWs and all these people to have like legitimacy as to that market audience.
But they're absolutely retarded.
They have to limit their influence massively because you saw the Gillette ad.
Mm-hmm.
You saw who else was it? The Coca-Cola Be Less White shit.
Oh yeah, and those ads have cost them money. What was it like $3 billion on the Gillette thing?
Yeah, so they kind of have to do the math on that because they can't kind of treat that as the way social media companies treat like a couple of $100 million in a fine for doing some shady shit.
Right.
It's a cost of doing business, or whenever Deutsche Bank or one of the other big banks get caught laundering narco money.
Oh, the good old HSBC.
So at that point, you're going to get like a couple of $100 million in a fine here or there, but it's also like $17 billion in drug money, so like can't really say no.
Right. Which that still makes me laugh.
Well, the people who are making the most bank off the drug war are, without a doubt, a mix of bankers and lawyers.
Mm-hmm. Oh, 100%. Although we'll see, that might come crashing down. El Chapo's ex-girlfriend, I guess now she's like turned stateside. So chick hits the wall. She might just ruin the Mexican drug cartels, or she'll end up on the trunk of a car, head on a spike. We'll see.
I don't think so, because I read about that, and they've had a couple of different strategies for doing that. One is kind of chopping the head off the snake.
Right.
But when they do that, what happens is you actually get more violence. Because if one guy is making $2 billion a year, you kill him, then suddenly you have his 8 lieutenants are all going to be fighting to be the next top dude who gets the most of the money. And then you have the strategy of, fighting them from the bottom up, which just doesn't work, because the people who, if you kind of do a pyramid of how this shit works, you have the people who are buying grams at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have the people who are selling grams. Then you have the guys who are selling between 100 grams to a kilo. Then you have guys who deal in the hundreds of kilos. Then you have guys who deal in tons. And on top of the guys who deal with tons, you have El Chapo. You're just not going to be able to trace that far enough up because it's too well insulated between the layers.
Right. Do you ever watch the movie King of New York?
It sounds familiar.
It had what the fuck? Morpheus. What's his name again?
Lawrence Fishburne.
Yeah, Lawrence Fishburne and for fuck's sakes, why am I drawing names? Anyways, that's exactly what you described at the end. Was the main character, and the name eludes me right now, but he's the guy that always dances. He was the star of Deer Hunter. Anyways, he made the case that he was just murdering all of like the heads of the drug families in New York because he wanted to run it and turn it into a business. Eventually, the cop that he kind of confesses all this stuff to shoots him in the subway. But what you're saying now is that the plan that the Mexicans are doing is just, yeah, fair enough. You can run everything, but at least then you'll make it stable. It's like the Reagan principle.
That's essentially what El Chapo did, because before El Chapo, you had a bunch of drug cartels, but they were all kind of in competition or in an oligopoly or something like that, and everyone was kind of working in parallel. What El Chapo
Christopher
did was,
Walken.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, keep going.
And what El Chapo did, he started the Sinaloa cartel, which was kind of like a co-op of cartels.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of fighting each other, they were like, okay, we're just going to pump as much drugs as we can through. And once you take away the leader of something like that, everyone tries to fill those shoes because no one's going to leave money on the table.
Right.
And it's the same thing with corporate, too. It's that you can take down one corporation, but the urge to buy the product is still there. So it's just going to bring in a new company.
That's why legalization is the solution to that, essentially.
And kind of what I'm seeing now is that we're kind of seeing a movement, anti-multinationals movement. People are, the early adopters are moving towards buying more locally, more small scale, more unique products because differentiation is important in the world of Gen Z. Like the boomers are all the fucking same. Sorry to say, but the whole thing with boomers is that they just don't want to stand out from the crowd.
Yeah, well, they only
That's
had
why
two channels growing up. Everybody had the exact same cultural influences their entire life.
That was kind of why, like, the whole thing with boomers is that it's go to school, get good grades, go to college, get a good college degree, get a job, work for 40 years until you retire and die.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of like the boomer view of the world. And that's gradually changed for the past 40, 50 years. Do we now have Gen Z, where one of the most important things there is attention. Even for men, it's an attention economy.
Yeah.
So they all try to differentiate themselves from the crowd, and they're not like the goths back in the day who like we're the outsiders, we don't conform to the norm, but they all dress the fucking same.
Yeah, no, it's to a level of individualization that's impossible to like track.
And it's kind of logical because all of us are getting our own unique feed every day. Because no two feeds are going to be the same.
It's true.
Even if you and I follow the exact same people on Twitter, if I like some other guy's tweets more, if I retweet some guy more, if I have DMs with some dude, I'm going to get more info from him. And if you do the same with some other person, you're going to get more from them. And then their networks come into it and so on.
Dude, I love that too. Occasionally you'll see like some random thing was like somebody you follow liked this. And I'm like, what the fuck is this? I usually end up finding some like good new stuff that way too. But you're right. It's like completely out of left field.
And that was a trend back when about, how long is that? 8, 9 years ago? The trend was towards completely individualized advertising. Because it used to be
like Minority Report shit with that like hologram floating around.
Yeah, like if you were doing marketing, let's say in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, you were doing demographic marketing.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to reach men ages 20 to 35, income between 100K and 150K, you would get specific, you would build an ad campaign towards them and you'd advertise during these times on the TV. You would have billboards in these areas. But now you can actually market specifically to Ryan Stone. And Google is getting it. Google and Facebook are getting very fucking good at it.
Mm-hmm.
So with everyone getting a unique feed and unique ads, that means individuality becomes attainable. Plus, everyone can shop at a global marketplace. I mean, you can have shit shipped from Alibaba 24/7.
Yeah. Oh, dude, I shop at AliExpress more than I shop like brick and mortar stores here in Toronto. Guaranteed.
Yeah,
Amazon, I'm finally on it. What's that?
And especially during COVID.
Oh God, it like there's no other way to do it.
It was kind of
it's not just that; it's things you can't get. Like
I kind of had this.
Oh, go.
Finish your thought.
I was gonna say, do you remember how you were talking about how everybody who performs at a certain level is on something like Ritalin or Xanax or Ambien or whatever?
Yeah.
It's like I have nootropics that sometimes I'm having like writing slumps to get me through it. I have to order that through the internet in a global marketplace. There's no nootropic store beside Popeye's Fitness here. That's my thought.
Yeah, no, I was just going to go into like, I got this flashback because I ruined the charger cable for my phone.
Oh.
And because they went from like the old like micro USB to USB-C,
mm-hmm.
I had like 1 million fucking cables, but none of them would fit my fucking phone.
I know this feel all too well.
So I had to order a new, and I have like wireless charging stuff, but you can use your phone and wireless charge at the same time.
Right.
And I usually use my phone when it's charging. So anyway, I decided I need to order a new cable. So I went in and I ordered a new cable and got it delivered. Like there was a guy who came here and delivered it the next morning. And that just gave me a flashback to the first time I ordered something from that same store,
right,
in like 2006. and it was like 10 days delivery time, and I had to wait for the regular mail.
Oh, that global supply chain, though, that's something else, isn't it?
And to me, that's just kind of the ultimate illustration of what's happening with everything we're seeing now. We're having a huge cultural upheaval where, let's say you want to change the law, for instance. It used to be, if you wanted to change the law, you either had to influence politicians, or in some countries, you can make your own propositions like they did in the US for weed. But now you can actually get enough people to support something on social media that politicians are kind of forced to act. And that's a completely new form of influence.
You know what it reminds me of? High frequency trading. Do you remember? Yeah, do you remember that story? I can't remember how long it was ago. Not more than a couple of years, though, anyway, where somebody forgot to carry the one on a program, and then the stock market dropped like 30% in one day or some stupid thing like that.
Yeah, the Procter & Gamble short.
That's the one, the Procter & Gamble short. I think that's kind of where we're going now. Like, yeah, you're right. From a global supply chain, you order something on Amazon, you get it the next morning delivered to your place by some dude on a bicycle. You start a social media campaign. You tweet about a hard R, you get off your flight, and you got fired somehow during your flight thing. You get all these little micro high frequency social events or whatever, but there's a real chance that one of them can spiral out of control super quickly before anybody has a chance to react. Again, that's one of those things, and this comes back to the topic, cancel culture. People don't know how and when they're going to be canceled because it's people shooting for clout, people trying to in-group signal, people trying to be on the right side of history or fighting against the wrong side of history. And then all these things converge to some asshole getting fired because he tweeted 3 days ago about, sucking dicks being gay.
Yeah, and it's like, you don't know at what point. It's like, I've joked that I'm glad I'm not a teenager now. Because when I did all my stupid shit, no one was carrying around a 4K camera in their pocket.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
I'm just gonna imagine, like, if all the dumb shit you ever did was posted on social media.
Dude, you post it yourself now. That's the worst part. It's not even that, like, you want privacy. Kids now are posting their own losses online, and I just don't understand. Like, well, any attention? What did Donovan say that one time? Oh, even negative engagement's engagement. I was like, all right, fair enough.
Well, the reason I think it's working too, though, is because we've had, like, the trend for a long time with social media, or let's say up until a year or two ago, has been about presenting the perfect picture of yourself to the external world. So let's say you get mommy bloggers who work full time but still take pictures of their perfect house and put that on Instagram because they want to look like perfect mom.
Oh yeah,
or you have the guys who have like, yeah, or you have the guys who have like their entire feed is them with women in cars. Or you have the guy who's like the stock trader who has like piles of money everywhere. And that's been kind of like the brand of me. But now you're starting to get to a point where authenticity has been undersold everywhere. And people have caught on to the fact that when you post that picture of you with the car, that's not your fucking car. Nope. When you post that perfect house, you paid for a maid.
It's all
and all this is becoming obvious. So the next one is actually posting your losses too.
Which is weird because keep going.
I've been seeing more and more of that with people that, okay, here are my wins, but here are my losses, and here are the average. And I think what kind of caught me onto this trend was a dude named Larry Lawton. Mm-hmm. He was in jail for like 21 years, and he started like a channel, and he grew big on YouTube.
Oh, is he the one that had the I used to rob banks? Here's me watching bank robbing scenes in movies.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That guy started with, here are all my fucking L's. That was essentially his brand starting off. Like, yeah, I was the biggest jewel thief. I was locked up for 20 years. Here's how we used to make pasta in prison. We used to steal this shit from commissary and all this stuff. Mm-hmm. And once that started to open up and people started to be like, yeah, I'm successful here, but I'm fucking bipolar, or I'm this, but I'm failing here. Then you started to get to see the nuances of the population. And once you normalize something in a population, like, do you think there are two things I think changed what made gay rights possible.
Mm-hmm.
Queer Eye for the Straight Guy and Will and Grace.
I thought it was because everybody had a gay friend in the neighborhood, or once they started raising property values by moving into places, everybody was for the gays.
No, but the reason why I think those two is that people who had a gay friend, they were normalized already, but the great majority of people, it's like, I'm not sure if I made the joke before, but I have a grandma who hates black people. She's never met a black person in her life.
Well, that's the way it usually works.
But once those shows came on TV and people watched, like, hey, gay people are normal people, is like the dude with an apartment, friends, whatever. And then you got the 5 dudes that came in and made over straight guys. Then people built like at least a relationship by proxy that made gays seem less dangerous. And it's so interesting when you start to read like countries where like being gay used to be criminal,
right?
And you read some of the newspapers like, well, we can't decriminalize homosexuality. They'll be recruiting faggots all over in your schools. Everyone will just be fucking each other in the ass everywhere. Do you really want your kids to see 2 men fucking on the street?
Oh yeah, it's hyperbole. I still love, like, the trads over here will make that same case that normalizing gay is bad, but then adamantly describe that video games don't cause school shootings. I'm like, well, you got to pick one. Either you can recruit people or you can't.
So I just think it comes back to like that. We have a natural instinct to need an enemy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we'll do this one first and we'll continue. I think the whole reasoning behind it, I think part of it is brand.
I think all of it is brand.
Because everyone loves like a good turnaround story. Like, I used to be fat, now I'm skinny. I used to be a drug addict, now I own a successful pillow company.
I used to be autistic, now I'm president of the manosphere.
Yeah, I used to be bankrupt in the 80s. Now I'm president.
Yeah.
Like, everyone loves the comeback story, but I think it also adds a layer of authenticity to a brand, because it used to take bravery to post like, oh shit, I fucked up. But then it became a source of realness, because when someone posts their wins, it feels like they're gloating. Because the natural impulse is to lift your wins up and hide your losses.
Right.
So doing the opposite of that, underselling your wins, but overselling your losses, makes people think you're more genuine.
Well, it sounds like it's a cheap signal shrouded as an expensive social signal. Here's why I don't like it, though. Because I'm sure at first, what was the thing? It used to be, this is me without makeup. Girls would post that in our social media profile. The idea being, oh, this is what they're like normally. We're getting a peek behind the curtain, but there was still a conscious decision. And that's why I'm pretty sure the word authenticity was specifically chosen and not sincerity, because authentic just tells you, like you said, a level of realness, a level of this, but it's still insincere as shit. Like, yeah, he's not trying to be real with you. He's just trying a different marketing strategy to get past your distrust of him flexing. And that's why I've noticed everybody's authentic. Like I always say, we're the only two that are sincere.
Well, I'll know people are starting to be sincere about being open with people on social media when someone actually starts using the sharing function on Pornhub.
Well, that's the sincerity part. It's like, my porn history is none of your damn business. I'm not going to post pictures of my wife's tits online for clout. That's my shit. That's private. And that's what I mean. There's a sincerity to that where, like, this is brand and this is me, and you don't get past that wall.
But I think you're on point, but I also think you're partially off point.
Probably.
Because one thing are the brand accounts. Mm-hmm. Like, you are a brand and you are a person.
Right.
But a lot of people are just persons who aren't.
Are they, though?
Who aren't necessarily trying to aspire to be a brand and who aren't trying to make money off this.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't think you have to make money to be a brand. I think a brand is just that public facade. It's no different than the church lady who's super nice and polite, but has like a BDSM fetish on the background.
Yeah, but if you start posting everything and being open about what's going on, so you're posting your wins, you're posting your L's, you're posting your normalcy, where does the line gets crossed from brand to person? The two become impossible to separate.
And that's kind of where we're at now.
Than perhaps by intent. I think I'm going to reference the book I referenced last week too, like the Carl Hart one. Professor Heroin Addict or Heroin user.
Oh, yeah, that guy.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of the peak behind the facade in the sense that he didn't do that in order to, I'm sure part of the intent behind doing that book was to make himself a bigger brand. But on the other hand, I think it's also partially because he realized it's much more effective if I want to accomplish this goal I have to write it in this way instead of writing 100 research paper because nobody reads research.
Right.
Someone talk about porn?
What? Here?
No, someone's talking about porn. Someone's talking about porn in chat.
Oh, I think they're talking about Sterling. And Thomas Bombadil wants to put his videos up. Well, I'll put it this way. I know you remember this term, the buying your own mark.
Yeah.
I think this is why I think pseudonames or pen names are kind of vital to keep that separation. Otherwise, you end up getting lost in your own mark. You have to be Terry and Hulk Hogan. You can't be just Hulk Hogan. You can't rename yourself to be Warrior. Because I think that's where you start getting psychological issues around it, where you realize you are your brand. Like I imagine the chick that's like, well, I'm going to divorce him because I'm not in love with him anymore, but only when I'm going to put out a new makeup brand. You know what I mean? At that point, the brand is like driving the humanity. And I think that's what authenticity is. Authenticity describes a brand and a person who is just interchangeable, as opposed to sincerity, which is like, yeah, I'm a person. This is my job. I'll let you see a little bit into the curtain, but I still have my own privacy. And I don't necessarily make life decisions based on the brand recognition.
That's a fair point. I'm just not sure where it ends.
Oh, I agree. This is new ground. I don't see anybody else doing it.
Because to kind of tie it back into the topic, if people start to be really sincere and open, then it's going to be near impossible to cancel anyone.
Eventually. But like you said, it's like people just get sick of it.
Yeah, but
or what's that thing you did? Exposure therapy.
Yeah, but you'll get to a point where there's essentially zero privacy unless you make an active choice to keep something private. And even then, it might not be 100% certain that it will remain private. The logical conclusion from that, if there's zero privacy, then everything about you is publicly known. That means everyone who wants to cancel someone will be able to be canceled for something else they did. It's like the old thing with when we used to joke around that whenever someone would come out as a male feminist, there would be a sex assault charge come out like the week after.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same case here that right now some people have shit dug up on them that leads to them or do something that leads to them being canceled.
Well, I can agree with that. It's like the Japanese model that where they agree that they're so stressed out they're going to get pissed drunk and shit themselves in the street and then the next day just not talk about it.
Yeah, and I think you'll get to that point quite soon. Because I used to be fairly off social media. I've been getting into it more and more. And the interesting discussion comes now. Can you actually ban someone from Facebook without that being, let's say, unusually cruel punishment? And
it's becoming increasingly the case where you can't.
And the reasoning behind that is, I know companies where they use Facebook as their intranet.
Really?
Where essentially all the corporate events are there. It's how employees get their shifts. It's where employees talk when they need to switch shifts. And at that point, it's virtually impossible to ban someone without that having a massive impact on their life. They lose the ability to socialize with coworkers, with family, stay up to date what's going on in the family and everything like. And
well, it's like shutting off their power in January. It's like a death sentence
essentially.
almost.
And so it becomes a very hard issue to ban someone, but that means you're going to have to allow a lot more diverse content, and you can't necessarily ban people for being racist because people are racist. There's always going to be that subset, and people are going to be like. That's why I've been liking TikTok, because it's essentially don't censor anything other than talking about Chinese politics.
You noticed that, did you?
Well, there's an account that kind of scroll by in my feed where they're like a couple posting they're swingers, and they're posting they're having a dinner with another swinger couple. And at that point, things will start to slowly become normalized, because I think normalization is the key. Because we tend to fear what we don't know, and we tend to fear what we feel is outside the tribe.
Yeah.
But once you find out that, okay, 6 out of 7 tribe members are really into bondage on the down low. Like 50 Shades was controversial when it came. Now it's like a completely vanilla movie, just because that bondage thing is in. And you can see it with sexual taboos really well. And I know I'm ranting on here, somewhat disjointed, but it used to be like you don't talk about sex at all. That generation's reaction was, okay, we need to at least be open and give our kids factual information. Like, we know you're going to use a fucking condom. Don't get some bitch pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And if you get a venereal disease, tell me so I can take you to the fucking doctor. Then it was the next generation where it was even a little bit more open, where it was kind of open to you were told about anal sex and oral sex and all these various things in sex ed.
Right.
And now it's getting to the point where they're like trending hashtags for eating ass on Twitter.
Well, yeah, now you don't want to talk about it. It's like, Dad, I've been watching TikTok all day. I don't want to hear about it at the dinner table now. You're back to not talking about it because it's so normal.
Well, it's not just TikTok, though. It's like I got caught
TikTok's
up
a metaphor. I get that.
Yeah, everything is on there now. So over time, people will be exposed to so much shit that I think social rules for what's acceptable within the Overton window of behavior, so to speak, is just going to be gone. It's just going to be normalized to a point where maybe not to the extent, but like doing heroin on a Wednesday is going to be fine.
Yeah. Well, there'll be new. I guarantee you there's going to be new social norms that replace it, but I'm like, it's anybody's fucking guess what's going to be the new hard R. Although that one's had a pretty good run, so maybe it'll stick around for a little longer.
It's going to be the hard K, man. Hard K.
Hard K.
Karen.
Oh, yeah, Karen, the slavery for white chicks. It's like, dude, stop trying to force it.
I just think it's going to get to a point where all the social norms are, they're going to change and they're going to be replaced. But I think we've always used kind of repression as a tactic.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, that's gone.
And that's just going to be gone because you're going to be at a point where everyone is open about all the things they do, and everyone does shady shit that they don't want anyone to know.
Yeah.
And I guarantee you, if you lined up and forced every senator and every congressman to take a drug test, at least like 10% of them would be on something, probably more. If you searched all their phones, you would probably find a ton of side chicks, some child porn, and a bunch of other shady deals, and a bunch of insider trading. So it's just going to get to a point where everyone has to be kind of accepting of everyone else's shadiness. And at that point,
we're already there.
And at that point, like, why would you cancel the guy because he dropped a hard R when you know that the guy over here, he banged an unconscious chick 25 years ago. And that chick over there, she's a nurse, but she also has an OnlyFans. And that kindergarten teacher is a stripper on the weekends. So at that point, I think the moralists lose this one.
Yeah, they do. Perfect example, 2007-ish. I remember this. a ship golf tournament. Our ship went to go play golf for the day. It's like a nice bonding exercise. The military owned the land, so we got to have some free golfing. And the guy who was driving me down there, one of our supervisors for my buddy, looks over at my buddy and he says, like, hey, is he cool? And he goes, yeah, yeah. Pulls out a bong from the glove box and starts toking his bong on the way to the company golf trip, like with the commanding officer. And that was all you need to know, is like, is he cool? That year, the military wanted to, like, somebody had the great ideas, like, let's start doing some randomized drug testing so we can get an idea of the problem. The idea is we're just going to randomly get piss tests. We anonymize the data so that way we're going to get an honest sample without people worrying about it. They thought we're probably going to get like 3 to 4% of the military is on some kind of drugs. They found it was like 17, and then the study was quickly dropped. But the one thing that came from it was interesting is that you found, depending on what element you were in, like the Army loved coke, the Navy loved weed, and the Air Force loved cock. But you're right. And that they kind of just had the understanding of, okay, so there's so many people doing drugs, and it didn't matter by rank. It turns out like officers tended to like MDMA and coke and stuff, like the more expensive stuff, and weed was leaning more towards the non-commissioned members too. So everybody kind of had the understanding, okay, so everybody's doing weed. We can't make a big deal out of it. So the de facto law kind of became, don't get caught for smoking weed. As long as you don't end up on the news, your career will be just fine. And as long as you show up to work on time, which is kind of the policy they had for alcohol. Functioning alcoholics were A-okay in the military. It's the ones that showed up late to work that they had to have a drinking problem to deal with.
Yeah, and it kind of reminds me of the, you remember the Ashley Madison hack?
Oh, yeah.
And you had like a ton of guys with .mil accounts and .cia accounts. And so
Ottawa was the biggest city in Canada for Ashley Madison accounts.
And you kind of saw, and I think these kind of things are just going to keep showing up more and more because we're starting to get data on things.
Yeah.
And it was kind of interesting with like France has some of the most repressive cannabis laws in Europe.
Really?
They also have the highest use among the population. And they recently did a survey, and like the government has said, we're not going to change the laws on this, but they just did a survey to kind of see, can we kind of not do anything? And there's like 80% favor legalization. And the WHO got a ton of shit back in the day too, because they commissioned a report to prove how dangerous weed was, and they found out that alcohol is way more dangerous than weed, and they tried to suppress the report, and then the report leaked. And I think you're just going to have a lot more of it because it's becoming nearly impossible to keep information hidden from the public.
Yeah.
Because it's not like the FSB, the what used to be the KGB and kind of still is, but they changed the name.
Right.
They just bought like 20,000 typewriters.
Oh, for
because the way they figured it, if it's digital, then it's very easy. You can take like, I'm not sure exactly how much, but if let's say you have a 32 gigabyte stick or flash card, you can take like the whole fucking archives. But if it's just if it only exists on paper and it's locked in a room, at least you can control who can access the room and keep a log of that.
Yeah, physical controls. The government figured that out too, because emails, you actually have like a hummingbird system that you have to archive this stuff. And so what they found is they would just have handshake conversations because you didn't have to have that stuff archived for eternity. And that's how the real work was getting done. Nothing was written down.
Yeah, and then I'm seeing that with some government stuff I've been working on it for a while too. It's that one thing is everything's being done the way you're supposed to do it on the surface, but everything is just done either via private accounts, via handshake deals, via phone calls or meetings, because then you don't have to log the minutes, for instance. So then you can have that conversation, or you can walk over to the water cooler and have a 5-minute conversation there. And no one really knows that conversation took place.
I agree. So Mark was talking here in the thing too about soldiers posting on social media used to track troop movements. We had that on social media. Remember when Facebook would always say you're checking into wherever? They're like, you got to stop doing that because you're letting them know ships movements, which is classified information. Or that one American base that was it China found out where the location of a secret military base was because all the Fitbits would track a running location in the middle of nowhere.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But I think ultimately it's just you can't put the, and I've been trying to tell tradcons this for years, you can't put the toothpaste back in the box. The best you can do is figure out how to use it and mitigate it. And I think the mitigation for cancel culture ultimately is going to be that everyone has those things they can be canceled for, so no one, it's kind of mutually assured destruction.
Right. That's the problem, though. And we're in that transition zone where there's still some fodder. But leverage it, man. If you get fired from Google because you said, you don't think trannies are gay or something stupid like that, then sell a book. 12 Rules for Life. Make your own version of it. Make your own brand out of it. And
yeah, the interesting thing there with Peterson, and we're on overtime now, so we should probably close soon. But the interesting thing with Peterson, though, is like he completely unintentionally followed the trend.
Mm-hmm.
He rode the wave on like Bill, was it 17 or whatever?
C11, I think it was, or
yeah,
C17.
The thing that codified pronouns, and
Yeah.
he rode that into anti-social justice warrior shit. Then he developed a pill addiction. He went to rehab, and then he comes back out with like this new revival story.
Yeah. And now he's kind of Joe Rogan. Now that Joe Rogan's gone, he's like the Joe Rogan mixed with the Weinstein guys, intellectual dark web stuff. Oh, I guess might as well end this one here. I was going to sneeze in for a sec. All right. Thanks, guys, for sticking around. Gendernomics is in the thing. I'll have some timestamps up after. Goodbye.